Imagine waking up one morning with a quiet but deeply unsettling realization. The life you are living may not actually be yours. Not fully, not truly. The choices you made, the beliefs you defend, the desires you chase. What if they did not come from the deepest part of you? What if they were inherited, conditioned, absorbed without your consent? Sit with that thought, because most people never do. They wake up, they move, they function, they perform, but they never question who is living their life. And the moment you begin to question it, something inside you tightens, a subtle resistance. Because the question itself is dangerous. If your life is not truly yours, then who has been living it? And more importantly, why have you allowed it? From the moment you entered this world, you were shaped. Before you could speak, you were named. Before you could choose, you were assigned roles. Good child, difficult child, smart one, sensitive one, strong one, quiet one. Each label landed gently, but it stayed. And slowly, without realizing it, you began organizing yourself around them. You learned what earned approval and what earned withdrawal, what made you visible and what made you disappear. You adjusted, you adapted, you survived, and survival always comes at a cost. You learned which emotions were welcome and which ones made people uncomfortable. You learned when to speak and when silence was safer. You learned when to hide parts of yourself so love would not be taken away. And each time you hid something real, something else took its place. A version of you that was acceptable. Carl Jung called this the persona. Not a lie, not exactly. A mask, a psychological interface between you and the world. The persona helps you belong. It helps you function. It helps you survive socially. But here is the danger. The longer you wear the mask, the more you forget it is a mask. And one day, you wake up, and the mask feels like your face. You say, "This is who I am." But it is not. It is who you learn to be. And deep inside, something knows it. That quiet discomfort, that subtle restlessness, that sense of living slightly off-center. That is not anxiety. That is not weakness. That is truth trying to surface. Most people feel it and immediately silence it. With work, with noise, with constant stimulation. Because to feel it fully would require change. And change threatens the structure they built their safety on. Jung believed something radical. That psychological health is not about adapting to society. It is about becoming whole. And wholeness does not come from fitting in. It comes from finding yourself. But here is the part few are willing to hear. You cannot find yourself without first realizing how much of you is missing, how much of you is buried. To keep the mask intact, because every mask casts a shadow, and that shadow follows you everywhere. The shadow is not evil. It is not darkness in the moral sense. It is simply everything you were not allowed to be, every emotion you suppressed, every impulse you judged, every desire you labeled unacceptable, anger you swallowed, sensitivity you hid, confidence you learned to fear, needs you told yourself were too much. You did not destroy these parts. You exiled them. And the psyche never forgets what it exiles. The shadow does not disappear. It waits. It waits beneath your awareness, shaping your reactions, influencing your choices, guiding your attractions and aversions. This is why you are triggered by certain people. This is why some behaviors in others ignite reactions you cannot logically explain. This is why you sabotage yourself right before growth. This is why patterns repeat, even when you swear you are done with them. The shadow speaks when you are not listening, and the more you ignore it, the louder it becomes. Jung said that what we resist persists, and what we refuse to see in ourselves, we inevitably see in others. Projection is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. Your psyche externalizes what it cannot safely contain. So instead of saying, "I am angry," you say, "They are aggressive." Instead of saying, "I want more," you say, "They are selfish." Instead of saying, "I am afraid," you say, "They are intimidating." This is how the unconscious protects the ego, but it also traps it. Because as long as your shadow remains unconscious, you are not free. You are managed by forces you refuse to acknowledge. Most people spend their lives trying to improve the persona, be better, be calmer, be more confident, be more successful. But Jung understood something deeper. You do not become whole by polishing the mask. You become whole by turning toward what you buried. And this is where the journey truly begins. Not with motivation, not with affirmations, but with honesty, radical honesty, the kind that asks uncomfortable questions. Why does this trigger me? Why does this person disturb me? Why do I keep repeating this pattern? Why do I feel empty, even when things look fine? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are invitations. The psyche does not ask them randomly. It asks them when you are ready to stop living on the surface. Because the truth is, most people never find themselves. They find roles. They find identities. They find stories. But they never meet the deeper self, waiting beneath the noise. They confuse familiarity with authenticity. They confuse survival with fulfillment. They confuse being needed with being whole. And then they wonder why life feels hollow. Jung believed that life does not truly begin until you find yourself, not the persona, not the role, not the narrative, but the deeper organizing center of the psyche. He called the self. The self is not the ego. The ego is who you think you are. The self is who you are becoming. And the journey between them is called individuation. Individuation is not self-improvement. It is self-recovery, a slow, often painful, always transformative process of reclaiming what was lost, of integrating what was rejected, of becoming whole rather than acceptable. And this is why most people avoid it. Because individuation costs you things. It costs you illusions. It costs you approval. It costs you identities that once kept you safe. It forces you to confront the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. And that confrontation changes everything. Once you see the mask, you cannot unsee it. Once you feel the shadow stirring, you cannot silence it again. Once the question appears, is this really me? It does not go away. It waits patiently until you are ready to stop running. This section is not about answers. It is about destabilization, about loosening the grip of identities you inherited but never chose. Because before you can find yourself, you must first accept this truth. You are not who you think you are. And that realization is not the end. It is the beginning. Most people never find themselves for one simple reason. They are never alone long enough to hear who they are. The moment silence approaches, they fill it. Noise, tasks, screens, conversations that mean nothing. Not because they are busy, but because silence is dangerous. Silence removes the mask. And when the mask slips, what remains is unfamiliar, uncomfortable. From childhood, you were taught to look outward for answers, for validation, for direction. Good grades meant approval. Obedience meant safety. Agreement meant belonging. And slowly, your inner compass weakened. You learned to scan the environment before scanning yourself. What is expected? What will be accepted? What will keep me included? This is not a personal failure. It is conditioning, and it works frighteningly well. Because the psyche values survival over authenticity, Jung understood that the ego is shaped first, not by truth, but by adaptation. The ego learns how to navigate the world with minimal threat, and it builds an identity based on what works, not on what is true. So you become functional. You become reliable, predictable, useful. But something essential is missing. You may succeed. You may be admired. You may be needed. And still feel hollow. Because adaptation is not alignment, and fitting in is not the same as belonging to yourself. Most people confuse the two. They believe discomfort means danger, so they avoid it. They stay in familiar roles, even when those roles suffocate them. They stay in relationships that drain them, because at least they are known there. They stay in identities that feel false, because the alternative feels terrifying. Jung said that neurosis is often the result of avoiding legitimate suffering, the suffering of becoming, because becoming requires loss, loss of certainty, loss of image, loss of who you thought you were. And the ego resists this fiercely. The ego says, stay the same. Do not disrupt. Do not risk rejection. Do not question the story. Because the ego believes that stability equals safety. But the psyche knows better. The psyche knows that stagnation is death. So it begins to speak, not loudly, subtly, through unease, through boredom, through a sense of meaninglessness, through anxiety that has no clear cause, through the feeling that you are living someone else's life. And when that voice is ignored, it grows stronger. This is why so many people feel lost in lives that look successful, why so many feel exhausted without understanding why so many feel disconnected, even when surrounded by others. They are disconnected from themselves. Jung believed that the unconscious is not passive. It is active, intentional. It seeks balance. And when parts of you are denied, it compensates. It disrupts. It destabilizes. Not to punish you, but to redirect you. Yet instead of listening, most people pathologize the signal. They say, something is wrong with me. They try to medicate the message away. They numb it. They distract from it. They scroll past it. But the psyche is patient. It will repeat the lesson until it is learned. And one of its favorite tools is repetition. The same relationship pattern, the same conflict, the same disappointment, different faces, same dynamic. This is not bad luck. It is unconscious loyalty to an old identity, because changing patterns requires confronting their origin, and origins are uncomfortable. They point backward, to childhood, to moments of adaptation, to choices made for safety. Jung believed that every adaptation creates a one-sidedness. You become strong in one direction and weak in another. If you were rewarded for compliance, you may struggle with assertion. If you were praised for strength, you may fear vulnerability. If you were valued for intelligence, you may suppress emotion. None of this is accidental. The psyche organized itself around what kept you accepted, but the price of acceptance was fragmentation. Parts of you developed, parts of you froze, and frozen parts do not die. They wait. They wait for permission to return. This is why self-discovery is not about adding traits. It is about retrieving exiled parts. The anger you were told was wrong. The sensitivity you were told was weakness. The ambition you were told was selfish. The depth you were told was too much. These parts hold energy, psychic energy, and when energy is blocked, it turns inward. It becomes anxiety, depression, compulsion, not because you are broken, but because you are divided. Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by eliminating opposites, but by holding them together. Light and dark, strength and vulnerability, reason and instinct. Most people choose sides. They become one-dimensional, but the psyche seeks totality. This is why the persona eventually collapses, because it cannot contain the full psyche. No matter how polished the mask is, it cracks under pressure. A crisis, a loss, a failure, a sudden awakening, and suddenly, the identity you relied on no longer works. This is where many people panic. They try to rebuild the same mask. They double down. But Jung saw crisis as an invitation, a summons from the deeper self, an opportunity to descend rather than escape. Because descent is necessary. You cannot access depth without going downward, into confusion, into uncertainty, into not knowing. The ego hates this. The ego wants clarity, definitions, labels. But the unconscious speaks in symbols, dreams, images, intuitions. This is why Jung paid such attention to dreams, because dreams bypass the persona. They reveal what the waking mind resists. They show you what is seeking integration, what is knocking from within. But most people ignore them. They dismiss intuition as irrational. They privilege logic over meaning. And in doing so, They sever the dialogue between ego and self. This is where fragmentation deepens. Because without dialogue, there is no integration. And without integration, there is no individuation. Individuation requires courage, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the courage to sit with discomfort without anesthetizing it, the courage to question beliefs you inherited, the courage to disappoint others in order to stop betraying yourself. This is why individuation often looks like withdrawal, periods of solitude, less noise, more reflection, not isolation as avoidance, isolation as incubation, a space where the psyche can reorganize. This is threatening to the collective because an individuated person is harder to control. They do not react automatically. They do not live by scripts. They are guided from within, and the world prefers predictability. But the psyche prefers truth. And when truth is denied, it destabilizes your life until you listen. This is why finding yourself is not a comfortable journey. It dismantles illusions. It removes false certainty. It strips away identities that once felt like home. But what remains is something far more solid. Not a role, a center, a sense of inner authority that does not depend on approval. And once that center begins to form, something changes. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself. You stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you, because you begin to understand yourself. And that changes the trajectory of your life. But this is only the beginning, because beneath conditioning, beneath persona, beneath shadow integration, there is something even deeper, something ancient, something not personal. In the next section, we descend further into the archetypes, the inherited psychological patterns that shape your fears, your longings, and your destiny without you even realizing it. You do not choose all of your patterns. Some of them choose you long before you made conscious decisions about who to be. Forces were already shaping the way you think, feel, and respond to life. Carl Jung called these forces archetypes, not symbols you invent, but structures you inherit, psychological blueprints embedded deep in the unconscious. They existed before you were born. They will exist after you are gone. And whether you are aware of them or not, they are active in your life. Right now, archetypes are not ideas. They are patterns of experience, ways the psyche organizes reality. This is why the same stories appear again and again, across cultures, across centuries. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the tyrant, the wise old guide, the innocent, the destroyer. They are not myths because they are fictional. They are myths because they are eternal, and each one of them lies within you. Most people believe their choices are personal, but Jung understood that many choices are archetypal. You fall into the same role again and again. The caretaker, the rebel, the achiever, the victim, the savior. Different situations, same internal script. This is not coincidence. It is the psyche expressing an unresolved archetype. Take the hero, for example. This archetype drives ambition, purpose, the hunger to overcome. It is the part of you that wants your life to matter. But when unconscious, the hero becomes restless, never satisfied, always chasing the next mountain, burning out, trying to prove worth. Through achievement, the hero unconsciously believes, I am only valuable if I conquer. So rest feels like failure. Stillness feels like death. And then there is the shadow. Not evil, not darkness for its own sake, but everything the ego refused to accept. Anger, envy, neediness, desire, power. The shadow is not weak. It is unlived life. Energy that was denied expression. And denied energy does not disappear. It turns sideways. It leaks into projections, into compulsions, into emotional reactions that feel disproportionate. This is why people are triggered, because what irritates you most in others is often something you disowned in yourself. The arrogance you condemn, the vulnerability you mock, the freedom you resent. The shadow exposes you. And because exposure feels dangerous, most people attack it instead of integrating it. But Jung believed that the shadow is the gateway, not something to eliminate, something to understand. Within it are instincts, creativity, boundaries, vitality. When integrated, the shadow becomes strength. When rejected, it becomes sabotage. Then there is the anima and animus, two of Jung's most misunderstood ideas. They are not about gender roles. They are about inner balance. The anima represents emotion, intuition, imagination, and connection to the unconscious. The animus represents logic, structure, decisiveness, and direction. Every person contains both. When one is suppressed, the psyche becomes lopsided. A person disconnected from anima may feel emotionally numb, cut off from meaning. A person disconnected from animus may feel directionless, unable to act on insight. And when these archetypes are unconscious, they are projected. You fall in love not with a person, but with your inner image. You idealize. You attach. You expect them to complete something in you. And when they fail, as all humans do, the projection collapses. This is why relationships are one of the psyche's favorite teachers. They reveal what you have not integrated. They expose unmet inner needs. They force archetypes into consciousness. But most people blame the other. They say, they changed. They betrayed me. They were wrong. Sometimes that is true. But often, what collapsed was an illusion, an unconscious archetype placed onto another human being. This is painful, but pain is not punishment. It is instruction. Jung believed that suffering becomes meaningful the moment it is understood. Without understanding, pain repeats. With understanding, pain transforms. Another archetype many people live from is the child, the wounded child, the abandoned child, the adapted child. This archetype holds memory, not narrative memory, emotional memory. The nervous system remembers what the mind forgot. This is why certain tones of voice can shut you down, why certain dynamics make you feel small, why you overreact, and don't know why. The child archetype seeks safety, and if safety was inconsistent, the psyche learned hypervigilance, people-pleasing, withdrawal, control, not because you are weak, because you adapted, but adaptation that once saved you can later imprison you. Jung warned that if the child archetype remains unconscious, the adult remains partial, capable in some areas, stuck in others. This is why someone can be successful, yet emotionally reactive, intelligent, yet relationally immature. The psyche developed unevenly. Individuation requires bringing these archetypes into awareness, not acting them out blindly, not identifying with them completely, but relating to them consciously. You are not the hero. You have a hero archetype. You are not the shadow. You have a shadow. You are not the wounded child. You carry one. This distinction matters because identification traps you. Relationship liberates you. When archetypes are unconscious, they possess you. When conscious, they inform you. And this is where true power emerges. Not power over others, power over inner fragmentation. The ability to respond instead of react. The ability to choose instead of repeat. But there is one archetype that governs the entire process, one that is rarely understood. The self, not the ego, not the personality, the organizing center of the entire psyche. The self is wholeness. It is what the psyche moves toward when not obstructed. It is why growth feels inevitable, even when resisted. It is why breakdowns precede breakthroughs. The self does not negotiate with the ego. It does not care about your image. It cares about integration. And when ignored, it destabilizes your life until alignment becomes unavoidable. This is why some people experience sudden awakenings, a loss that shatters identity, a realization that rewrites meaning, a moment where the old self dies. This is not failure. This is initiation. The psyche forcing individuation. Because the self cannot be denied forever. And when it finally breaks through, it feels both terrifying and unmistakably right, like remembering something you never consciously knew. But here is the final challenge. Even after understanding archetypes, even after shadow work, even after insight, there is one illusion left, the most subtle one, the belief that there is a final version of you to arrive at. In the next section, we confront this illusion, the illusion of a fixed self, and what remains when even identity dissolves. At some point on this journey, something strange begins to happen. The questions change. You no longer ask, "Who should I become?" You begin to ask, "Who am I without the story, without the labels, without the history, without the roles you learn to play?" This is where most people stop, because this question feels destabilizing. The ego does not survive uncertainty. It needs edges, definitions, certainty. It says, "If I am not this, then what am I?" And Jung's answer was unsettling. You are not a fixed thing. You are a process, a movement, a living system, in constant reorganization. The ego wants a final identity. The self wants wholeness. And wholeness is not static. This is the deepest illusion of all. The belief that one day you will finally arrive, that there is a finished version of you, waiting at the end of growth. There isn't. And this is not bad news. It is liberation. Because the moment you stop trying to crystallize yourself, you stop fighting life. Most suffering comes from clinging to an outdated identity, trying to remain who you were after the psyche has moved on. This is why transitions hurt, because something must die, not physically, psychologically. An image, a belief, a role. Jung understood that. Psychological death is not pathology, it is renewal, but only if it is allowed. Most people resist this. They try to preserve what is already dissolving. They numb, they distract, they cling, and in doing so, they create stagnation. The psyche does not stagnate peacefully. It protests through anxiety, through depression, through a sense of unreality, as if life is happening one step away from you. This is dissociation from self, a life lived from habit instead of presence. But when you stop resisting change, something extraordinary happens. You feel lighter, not because life becomes easy, but because you are no longer dragging a false self forward. You begin to respond. Instead of defend, you act from alignment. Instead of fear. This is not mystical. It is neurological. Energy once used to maintain illusion becomes available for life. Creativity returns. Curiosity returns. Vitality returns. And so does responsibility. Because when you see clearly, you can no longer pretend. You don't know. You can no longer blame. Only circumstances. You see your patterns, your avoidance, your projections, your unconscious loyalties. And with awareness comes choice. This is where individuation becomes ethical, not moral, ethical. You begin to ask, what is mine to carry? What is mine to change? What is no longer mine to repeat? This is not about perfection. It is about honesty, radical honesty, with yourself. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were rewarded for being, not who kept you safe, but who emerges when fear is no longer in charge. And this emergence is subtle. It does not announce itself. It feels like alignment, a quiet yes, a sense of internal coherence. Your actions match your values. Your words match your inner state. Your life begins to feel lived from the inside out. And here's the paradox. The more individuated you become, the less you need to prove it. You stop explaining. You stop convincing. You stop performing. You simply live. This is why truly individuated people often unsettle others. They mirror unconsciousness. Without trying, they expose fragmentation by being whole. And this is not always welcomed. You may be misunderstood. You may be resisted. You may outgrow spaces that once defined you. This is the cost. But the cost of not doing this work is far greater. A life lived in quiet desperation. A life that looks acceptable, but feels empty. A life where the self is never fully inhabited. You were not born to merely function. You were born to become conscious, to integrate, to remember, to live in dialogue with the depths of your own psyche. And here is the truth. Few people will tell you. You do not find yourself once. You find yourself again and again, at deeper levels, each time surrendering another illusion, each time returning more fully. And this channel exists for one reason, not to give you answers, but to help you ask the right questions, to slow down, to look inward, to notice what most people avoid. If something in you recognized itself in these words, that was not coincidence. That was the psyche responding. So here is the invitation, not a demand, an invitation. If you are ready to explore your inner world with honesty and depth, if you are willing to confront your shadow instead of projecting it, if you want to understand your patterns instead of repeating them, then stay here. Subscribe to Inner Phoria, not for motivation, but for meaning, not for comfort, but for clarity. This is not content to consume passively. This is work to live consciously. And if this resonated, leave a comment, not for the algorithm, for yourself. Write one sentence about what you recognized in you today, because awareness spoken aloud begins integration. And remember this, you were never broken. You were never lost. You were becoming. And life truly begins the moment you stop running from yourself